I think of words for things.
Projects for BMW, Miller Brewing Company. You had to realize that writing is really solitary. It's a miracle to have something come out of the ether like that, and you get to be the voice of a brand. My dream is to still produce one of those things they'll be talking about 50 years from now.
You mean network slacker?
On behalf of my generation, I'd like to say to anybody younger, sorry.
This edition of Promo Cowboys is all about the writer's role in TV promotion and advertising. Joining me today is Alex Kroll, a man with what I consider the dream career, a professional writer and voiceover artist. It's a dream career because, basically, you don't have to get dressed to do the work. Heck, you don't even have to get out of bed. This is Barry Fitzsimmons. Welcome to Promo Cowboys, talking TV branding, marketing, and promotion, plus some other stuff. Alex Kroll and I came to know each other in 2001 when ESPN paired us as writer and producer partners for their NHL coverage. This partnership yielded some of my favorite work to date, chiefly thanks to the writing, which was Alex's part.
Winter is your season. You dream in slapshots.
Not just the writing, the voiceover too.
You see faces smeared into the plexi, and it makes you happy. You heckle
Idiot!
a TV. You're the type of fan who watches the NHL on ESPN too.
We were sort of Martin and Lewis for a couple of seasons of Wednesday night hockey. Or maybe we were Abbott and Costello.
Remember when we were making those ads? The sense of freedom you had. I know the budgets were minuscule, but we were making the sound effects. It was so much fun writing, producing, and even in many cases voicing the spots.
You were doing the radio spots, as I recall, and I was doing the TV spots. I recall us getting together for the first time around the end of 2001. Tell me a little bit about what you've been working on since.
Well, what I've been doing is trying to work as a writer, a copywriter, advertising, a short story and essay writer, and of course voiceover, which when I'm fortunate enough to get a client is like, it's like lotto, like the cargo cultists of your word. It's a miracle just to have something come out of the ether like that, and you get to be the voice of a brand. So I've been working real hard on that.
You want to do as much voice work as you can, but you got to do some writing to keep you and your wife, in your home and all that. What sort of writing are you doing to keep yourself in the game?
Well, I trade a bit on the 7.5 years I put in at a great shop called Siegel and Gale, which is like the premier branding strategic consultancy around sort of a hybrid agency plus sort of a brand genetics approach that is, I think, is well thought out as anybody's approach in that strange little business of branding. The founder, I got to work with a great deal of, tremendous gentleman, a lion of the media, Alan Siegel. He's a phenomenal guy. The spotlight follows him. He fills the room. A great character. So I try to trade on that as much as possible. In the meantime, I've been working for Jet, that new online buying system whereby you get the most efficient means of securing the lowest prices online, I guess you could say. And also been working, selling some of the most precious objects known to man at a place called Real Estate Arts. It's an advertising agency devoted almost exclusively to these incredible buildings in New York, Singapore, around the world. Projects for BMW, Miller Brewing Company, beers, light beer, high life. While at Siegel and Gale, we produce some commercials, radio and print and television for Kroll bond ratings. No relation, but we do share the same pharmacy with those Krolls. You might know Jules Kroll, founder of Kroll Security, and his son, Nick Kroll, a well-known comedian.
Walk me through your skill set as though we just met. Maybe we're at a cocktail party and I don't even work in the business.
Well, first of all, I'd hand you my business card and say I can write an ad that's more concise than this business card because I did it in a horrible Times Gothic, overwrought kind of style. So that's a good conversation starter, is to try to highlight my shortcomings right away.
I think many of us do that.
The skill set I like to say I bring is that I think of words for things. So whether we do it as a voiceover or as a headline or as a concept, a strategy, I really enjoy the early phases of strategy, where you immerse in everything you can find about the subject and then sort of run wild with it and start literally, as we used to do in the days of the typewriter, paper the walls, headlines of different sizes, different typefaces. It's all very visual process as much as it is oral and or oral, if you follow.
Oral with an O and oral with an AU. So let's talk about process a little bit, because you started talking about papering the walls.
Well, the process is just to physically sit down and write. It's the hardest thing to do, really. When you should be doing it, it seems to be the last thing you want to do. I always carry a little piece of paper around with me so that I can jot down a thought that might occur to me, because you never know when they will strike. The process is, unfortunately, right now includes a great deal of web surfing.
Sure.
And, looking around the room and wondering, what is in prospect for a guy who still brings basically the same credentials I had in college.
For myself, when I'm writing, I found of late that I'm really enjoying bringing people into the room, having a conversation, and having copy be the result of the conversation. And it's not the typical lines you hear in a promo. She was this, he was that, together they were this,
Right.
Or in a world, in a land.
That's a very true thing, is to hear the things you maybe weren't listening for that someone else can say. You got to pounce on them when somebody else drops a gem, which can happen. Anybody can do it. But oftentimes you'll breeze right past it if you're not listening, and it's hard to listen. If you're like me, when it's headline time, you're just churning and churning and churning, and everything looks good.
There was an old miller who lived by the mill. Every time the mill turned to its will, a hand upon the hopper and the other on the sack. Oh, every time the mill turned, grab, boys, grab.
My dream is to still produce one of those things he'll be talking about 50 years from now.
Hello, this is your all-purpose fictional announcer. If you've seen Miller Lite's sumo wrestler High Dive and the incredible luge bowling, then you know that if you can combine great taste and less filling, you can combine anything.
That was, of course, Alex Kroll in a spot he wrote and produced for Light Beer from Miller. What is it about us writers? Why are we so weird? I got a thing about the respect for the writer, and perhaps the lack thereof. And I want to get your take on this, using the talking point of the Shaggy Dog tale about the Hollywood starlet who was so dumb she slept with the writer. And I think that mentality still exists to a degree. But talk to me about how you view the writer's role enterprise-wide.
Well, there's still not a software to replace us yet. I was watching a bit of that Twilight Zone marathon the other day. Do you realize that Rod Serling wrote like 75% of the teleplays?
Yeah.
Things, and they were doing them week after week after week. He's more than a cliche now. He is absolutely embedded in our culture. The writer's job, I think, is to really look at things anew, differently, try to see something fresh in it, in whatever the subject matter is. If you're doing it clear-eyed enough, you'll notice things that aren't always the best about the situation as well. I've been told I'm not the best poker player.
Ah, you think that's perhaps a characteristic shared by many writers, if not all?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're an odd fit wherever they go, or they should be, because it's their distance from the everyday that makes what they say potentially so interesting. It's a lot of power right there, and writers probably shouldn't be aware of that power too much, prone to grandiosity as we may be. It's probably best that we're kept in our humble straits until you deliver your ultimate message of brilliance.
So it may be better to not be the guy on staff, but instead to be the outsider who provides some amount of brilliance needed for the moment.
Well, I don't know. It's easy to say you hate your job when you got one. But it's fun going back, and seeing how agencies have evolved or devolved or sort of federalized or spread out. Even when I was at Siegel and Gale, the refrigerator's just stuffed with dairy products, and you you'd come in the morning and every kid in front of that monitor would be eating a bowl of cereal. You know, it's like, these guys are still growing. It's still a very young and vital business.
I feel like the younger people coming up don't value writing the way we do and are much more interested in other skill sets. And maybe that's not a skill as much as it is a talent. But I'm kind of thankful that most of them would prefer to be editors and shooters, and the bright lights are more interesting to them than the darkness of looking inside and finding the proper words.
Did you ever hear the history of Frank and Jesse James and the four younger boys?
Storytelling is evolving in a way that I'm a little troubled by here in this new century, but I'm also thankful that I can remain with one foot in the 20th century and tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it does seem like that's still a valued thing to bring to the table at certain places, but fewer places, sadly.
You had to realize that writing is really solitary, most of it. You know, and you have to be willing to sort of expose yourself a bit, particularly in the commercial situation where people are just tell you to your face it's, you know, nonsense. And that's acceptable. But it still means, you know, getting one of your pet ideas or more knocked down. And a lot of people, you know, it's a distasteful feeling. It's kind of like auditioning. You almost never get it. It is a way to keep busy, though. Trying to get ever better and better at writing, I think, is the best thing that certainly I can try to do. The language is changing around us. You know, the old rules still apply. And in that respect, I come from George Orwell's point of view in his essay, Politics in the English Language, where he talks about the ascent of euphemism and acronymization as means of concealing what is actually being said. And that's where I think a lot of people misread advertising. They think that it's all propaganda, that it's being, something is trying to be sold past you instead of sold to you, when in reality, almost all advertising is carefully regulated for probity. You can't lie. That little wedge of difference is where the writer comes in.
Are we being asked to be creative writers now, or are we being asked to hit all of the points in the marketing brief and basically write bland?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, from the standpoint of coming in as a freelancer, you got to play it pretty close to where they want to be. And I think being inside the organization at that point would be advantageous if you developed some street credibility with these guys you've been working with for a while. You have a point of view on something that's been established. You might find it easier to sell a more, if you will, revolutionary idea. But I think the point is to try to hit all the bullets and make it sing. Of course, I was at Leo Burnett. We were slugging away for years on a single account. That can get heavy. The emotional payload of that, and the relationships that come and go, and the politics.
And you're looking for a million ways to say the same thing in 3 words?
Yeah. That somebody above you sold in as the concept to begin with, and then you have to sort of shape everything. You got to shoehorn it a lot of times into the bigger vision.
Yeah.
And that takes discipline and you know, self-control a lot of times. You grow too close to the work and you can't see it anymore, you know?
Oh, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam, oh, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam.
Talk to me about your take on the show Mad Men. I'm going to assume you've seen at least some of it, and I know the show's come and gone, but what did you think of the representation of the industry and the writer's, you know, role in it?
Well, for the longest time I poo-pooed it. I'm like, hey, whatever, I kind of lived that, and I don't do any number of reasons, all of them rooted in jealousy that somebody had this great idea for an absolutely superlative television series, which I enjoyed the heck out of. I mean, it kind of smelled right to me. The stories I heard on my own, from my own experience growing up in such a milieu, they lived crazy. My dad was a high ranker at YNR back in 1970. Young and Rubicam, then a privately held agency, essentially rented the Grand Canal of Venice for a worldwide creative account get-together. His New York creative director. This guy had been with the agency for years and years and years, and he was in the gondola with my mom and dad at this garishly lit gala, amazing party. He was so happy he reached like the Faustian tipping point. He twice tried to jump into the canal because he had reached the acme of happiness in his life. My folks had to drag him back on board the gondola.
You know, it's funny because the Mad Men thing, I did love the show, and like you at first had real trouble with it because, I mean, I thought it was really well done. And in fact, a friend of mine wrote a couple of the first episodes of that first season, but I was so challenged by it as the child of a madman. And my old man, I said, Dad, look at this show. Tell me what you think. My old man said, no, it was nothing like that. And I'm like, really? Okay. He's like, yeah, they're overplaying it. You know, I think they're just trying to make it Hollywood. But then I kind of came to the conclusion that he didn't want me to know what had gone on so much in those days. Now, they may not have been as wild in Detroit, where my old man was based, but he made many, many trips to many, many cities, New York among them, of course, working for J. Walter Thompson on the Ford account for my entire childhood. And the arc of the Detroit guys in Mad Men shows a handful of guys who are absolutely out of control. They all wear white shirts with striped ties, and they get so drunk, and then they get behind the wheel, and they do really silly things, and they end up shooting one of the characters in the face with a, you know, I mean, they were nuts. Now, my dad may have been that crazy. I don't know. I didn't get to see a whole lot of him when I was a kid because he was always working. The Wikipedia search on Alex Kroll brings the result Alexander Stanley Kroll, college and pro football player. He attended Yale until after serving in the Army. He finished college at Rutgers and went on to a short pro career with the Jets.
Correct.
Back when they were called the Titans. And then at Y&R, he rose from cub copywriter to chairman. So this is your father, am I right?
That is him. He is a tremendous talent, a massive autodidact. And my interest in things Russian stems from him, even though he's of Polish, Slovak descent, and my mom's of English, Scottish descent. He started actually in research at Y&R, and then joked that he was as a summer job between seasons in college. And by the time he'd finished his first year playing, or his 1 year playing for the Titans, the year before they became the Jets, they had a little trouble paying the players, having the checks clear for playing professional football. So at that point, I believe I was slated to arrive, and his young bride and he required a little more substantive income. So he latched onto Y&R, and his ascent there was extraordinary. One of the things from his career that I love so much is that he got to work with Mel Brooks, taking his 1,000-year-old man concept and applying it to Ballantine beer, and the 1,000-year-old brewmaster.
This one is a loser.
And they did something like 75 different commercials for radio with Mel Brooks, just basically open mic.
Hey, this is no good too. This has nothing.
Reacting to the interlocutor, who initially was my dad, but then because he wasn't SAG, they put him, or AFTRA, they found a guy named Dick Cavett. It was Dick Cavett.
Okay. So your pause is actually very well put there. I was like waiting, and I thought it would be somebody I'd never heard of.
We're here in the cave of the 2,500-year-old brewmaster to prove there's more spirit to Ballantine beer. Sir, just taste these 3 different beers and tell us honestly which is the best.
I would be very handsome too.
So he did that, and then, a series of commercials for Dr. Pepper. Did that. They did I'm Stuck on a Band-Aid. Band-Aid Stuck on Me. They did all the stuff with Cosby for Jell-O.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so my dad knew Cosby pretty well. And they were both great athletes.
Oh, I am a jolly Irishman, from Ireland I came. Do you want to know more about me? Pat Murphy is my name. The reason
my old man, in his time in J. Walter, he did some stuff that, I mean, what was groundbreaking, I thought, was he started to use Vangelis music.
Link Lincoln-Mercury introduces the totally new Lynx. Its hemispherical head
Yeah,
engine,
he did that, and
transmission, and
I remember being on the set for a few pieces that he shot, and he was always shooting big stadium things, getting every Ford model for a given year out onto the field and having them drive forward toward the camera like they were a football team. And I remember Candlestick Park, I don't know, 76, 77. He's got, I don't know how many, 45 dancer singers. And I think they were still trying to recapture the Coke ad, teach the world to sing. My old man burned out long before he reached my age, though.
It was a crucible, man.
Yeah.
And there wasn't readily available xenotransplants of livers at that point, and people were just, it was hardcore. I mean, we even sensed that in the 80s. I mean, it was still vestiges of that. It was still crazy. On behalf of my generation, I'd like to say to anybody younger, sorry.
Yeah, you missed out.
No, and we've screwed up.
But you go to some of these new 2.0 kind of companies, and one of the first things they show you is the kitchen where they keep the bar, and people are allowed to drink in the middle of the day. It's okay as long as they get their work done. And I'm like, wow, they're not doing that at NBC and CBS. And who knows what else they're doing. I'm hearing about people who are taking micro doses of LSD now to up their creativity and productivity in these new kind of companies that will tolerate such things. More of my conversation with Alex Kroll in a moment, but first, this Promo Cowboys podcast is brought to you by bourbon, beer, and bar pretzels, and by the novel Promo Cowboy, a TV industry thriller by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons, available at Amazon.com, the Kindle store, and your finer bookstores. Okay, so Alex and I share a common thread, being not only writers for TV and advertising, but also writers of fiction. I write often because I literally have voices in my head telling me to. So tell me why you write.
It's all I know how to do. Ever since I sort of ran afoul of trigonometry. I'll talk you around some numbers, but don't ask me to crunch them. The thing is, on my mom's side of the family, her father was a metallurgist, her uncles are naval architects. Her grandfather has a law of statistics named after him. They were all bald, though, and so I actually still have some hair. That was the trade. That was the trade.
Let's talk about Fourth and Gogol. That's the novel that I'm familiar with of yours, which when I read it, I greatly enjoyed it. It killed me. No, I'm not joking. I laughed out loud. I nodded in agreement. I scratched my head. It's a very entertaining read. It falls into the category of Catch-22 and I was drawing. Wow. I use Venn diagrams a lot. Wow. I don't know how. Did you say ow?
I said wow.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, draw the Venn diagram that contains Catch-22, the movie The Longest Yard, and maybe anything by Tom Clancy, and Fourth and Gogol's right there in the middle. So how did you come to write this Cold War alt history football epic?
The idea was to steal a march, basically, on America's great sense of primacy by the Russian premier, who issues an order to basically create a competitive world-class American football program inside Russia in secret so that they can surprise the world at the forthcoming Olympics in a way to show up the Americans. It seemed to be a natural the idea actually survived the Cold War, the end of the Cold War. The book came out of my experiences playing football and also studying Russian in college and Russian history. And eventually they naturally merged. And, there's some secret twists and turns in there, but it is a fairly recognizable Cold War comedy, if you will, sort of inspired more than anything else probably by Dr. Strangelove by Stanley Kubrick.
So talk to me about any new novel that you might have in the works, perhaps a sequel.
I've got a couple longer stories I'm working on. It's a difficult process, but I've been trying my hand at short stories more. When the gracious muses bestow an idea on me, I try to see if these things hold together as something longer than a short story or a novella. Most of my concern right now is in the encroachment of these wonderful interweb technologies into our very lives, private lives, and what that can mean from the standpoint of the phones we carry around, the personal data assistants. It's basically an invitation to have somebody put leverage on you. You know, I know it sounds a little over paranoid, but the fact is that's how you ensure cooperation from people, by knowing who they're close to, who can be pressured, and that whole aspect of our modern society, enforcement apparatuses of various governments, agencies.
This from a guy who studied Russian history and literature at Princeton.
I naturally skew towards suspicion of central powers, you know. I much prefer the U.S. model to everything else, that being said, but I still fear we're treading down the hallway to what a great Soviet dissident named Andrei Sinyavsky called a new conformism being forced upon us. You know, it means well, but it's still nonetheless suffocating.
It's very Orwellian, isn't it? All of the technology we have harkens to Orwell to me, and we're all looking at devices all day long. We're all sitting in front of screens all day long. It's Winston Smythe, and the screen will be talking back to us pretty soon.
But we're entertained, too, like in Brave New World, and medicated.
Are you publishing much?
Just online. Online. Look for me at selfinflictedworld.com.
Is there any money in this?
No. The old saying is it's for the drawer. I just want to have it out there so somewhere in, electronic memory, there'll be some brief note of my passage on this earth.
What's to stop you from creating a collection and publishing on CreateSpace or something like that?
Well, I didn't know about that. You're full of good ideas.
Yeah, actually, I published Promo Cowboy on CreateSpace, and it is available at Amazon.
These guys don't wear pads. They don't get paychecks. They play for school colors. That's old school.
Let's talk about your voiceover career a little bit more. So I'm one of those guys who's been reading scratch tracks, I think, around 25 years now. I read a scratch track for just about every spot that I produce.
Tony Kornheiser, Michael Wilbon.
I can think of times where I preferred my own voice to the voice artist that we hired to do the spot.
ESPN2.
Is that what got you into voice work? Or talk to me how you made that transition.
Get together some of your scratch tracks, put them on a reel, and present them to an agent.
Take your sports skills and street smarts on the road in the ultimate cross-country sports adventure.
You know, it's been a little hit or miss, but overall a very satisfying relationship with the guy I work with, and he gets me a pretty good number of at-bats every week. And so, you take your chances, you take a swipe at it, and if you hit it, you're blessed.
Okay, here's a little experiment. You just heard a couple scratch tracks I did for ESPN. Now listen to a spot, half of which is voiced by yours truly, the other half by the one and only John Henry Kurtz. See if you can tell the difference.
College rivalries as fierce as North versus South, as heated as Hatfield and McCoy. Fighting, feuding, never waving the white flag. ESPN Classics got a week of these here epic matchups. Teams that make each other so darn mad they fight a civil war every year.
Shoot, the Hatfields and McCoys weren't nothing compared to this. ESPN Classics Rivalry Week. The feud starts Monday, November 18th on ESPN Classic.
Okay, I admit, it's easy to tell who the real pro is there. John Henry Kurtz is 1 in a million, and we still miss him. Back to my conversation with Alex. So what I think I'm hearing you say is that you, after developing the ability to read stuff because that was part of your job, you realized, hey, I could do this part for a living.
Indeed. And I think being a copywriter by trade can maybe slightly advantage you in terms of trying to suss out the meaning of what the guy or gal has written that you're reading. Because a lot of times you don't have a great deal of direction or clues, especially when you're recording an audition from home. The real thing that helped, too, was the fact that for a couple of years I lived down in Louisville, Kentucky. I was not incarcerated.
How did you end up in Louisville?
Well, I was chasing a job down there. It looked like a good creative opportunity. I met my wife in Chicago when I was working at Leo Burnett, and I asked her to marry me before we moved to Louisville. Then took her down there with me as a hostage.
I'd be very happy, being a bourbon man, I'd be very happy in Louisville, I'm sure.
You would indeed. They're making some great stuff down there now.
Yeah, and I actually was a big fan of a show that recently was finished its run called Justified. I don't know if you saw that, but...
yeah, I saw a good bunch of it. It's an excellent show.
Yeah, my favorite. And that Promo Cowboy, I finished the first draft of the novel long before I'd ever seen an episode of Justified. But they're like Irish twins, Promo Cowboy and Raylan Givens. Imagine taking that ethos and some of the story arc and dropping it straight into the television on-air promotion world of the year 2000, and that sort of gives you a vague idea of what you're going to get from the novel Promo Cowboy and from every sequel that I write.
It's a great town. I'm not kidding you. It's a perfectly scaled town for somebody with talents as modest as mine. It enabled me to write, read aloud, to direct. It was because it's a non-union town. It was a chance to really get dirty on all the aspects of production. So that was a huge, I think, help. Because while there was nobody to sort of school the obstreperous natural ham that I am, there was still some good stuff that managed to emerge that formed the basis of, in addition to scratch tracks and things like that, that enticed the agent's interest.
Well, it's funny because, I read a scratch track with an announcer voice generally, or something along the lines of the kind of energy I'd hear from like a Ralph Gunderman or a John Henry Kurtz, the guys I was working with pretty regularly.
Great men.
Yeah, great men. And I realized myself that it is more about just softening it up and talking like you're talking to a friend.
Or doing it really announcery, which they probably wanted anyway, even though they said they didn't.
Well, they want it if it's not working for you to be all millennial, as it
You mean network slacker? I like talking network slacker, man.
Yeah, and there's a place for that kind of work. But I mean, wasn't Hal Riney a producer first, or was it Don LaFontaine? I mean, great advertising icons who ended up being great voice icons.
Well, Riney was a writer. Well, he was awesome.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history.
I got lucky over the holidays. I picked up some Fiat work because I've been practicing doing a Darth Vader impression since Star Wars came out when I was 13. I've had that James Earl Jones thing in the hopper, ready to go, and somebody finally bought it. Praise be and hallelujah.
Amen. So are you going to share some with us?
This is Promo Cowboys Podcast. This is Promo Cowboys Podcast. I find your lack of faith disturbing. The force is strong with this one.
Indeed. More of my conversation with Alex Kroll in a moment. Now it's time for Getting Fired in America, an opportunity to share humorous and heartbreaking stories of losing your job. Today we hear from a one-time New Englander who found himself in Nevada of all places. He's asked that we withhold his name.
Okay, my mother didn't raise me. And in fact, my father and his new wife, who did raise me from the age of about 1, they got a divorce. So they divorced and they sent me to go live with my mother, who lives in Reno, Nevada. Now, I have come from a place that is, let's say, a little nicer. I'm not going to say where, but Reno, Nevada, not the nicest town. And I live in a little apartment. My mother's a waitress at a coffee shop at a truck stop casino called Sierra Sid's. This is in Sparks, Nevada, right next to Reno, Nevada. There's a joke that Reno is so close to hell, you can see Sparks. It's a 24-hour operation. Your typical truck stop casino with truckers, some locals, very salt-of-the-earth people. So I'm a busboy. I'm 17 years old. My mother gets me a job at the coffee shop as a busboy. And I've been a busboy before, so I know how to be a busboy. And they give me this really uncomfortable uniform. It's got a zipper that goes all the way up. Very uncomfortable, very ugly. Imagine the most uncomfortable, ugliest clothing you can wear. That's what this uniform was. And it's the end of my shift. It's about my third or fourth shift. And I was working a swing shift, so it's around 11 o'clock. And I'm finishing my shift, and I've been a busboy all day, and I'm a little sweaty, and I'm a little tired. And I'm sweeping the floor over by the employee table. Now, the employee table, I come to learn, was where all the waitresses and the other help from the casino, whether it be the 21 dealers or the keynote staff or, I don't know, the guy who deals craps or roulette. It's a full casino. They come and have their employee meals. They sit at a big round booth. It's always full of people. They're always having smokes and having laughs. So it's around 11 o'clock, and the table is full of a lot of cackling women who are all sitting with an older gentleman wearing a cowboy hat. He looks a little silly to me, but I'm sweeping away, and I've actually pulled my zipper down a little so that it's around my sternum. I'm quite hot. So I'm sweeping back in the corner, minding my own, waiting to end my shift, and all of a sudden I hear, "Hey boy, come on over here." And I look up, and it's the gentleman at the employee table with all the ladies. I figure, okay, I walk over, and I say, "Yes." And he reaches out to me, and he grabs my zipper, and he pulls up on it. And he pulls up on it pretty hard, and he manages to catch my chin with his thumb, and it was almost like an uppercut. All the women at the table thought this was hilarious. And he said to me, "Get yourself some chest hair before you pull your zipper down like that." And then the women thought that was funny too. And you can imagine how I felt. I'm a 17-year-old boy. I walk away feeling very, very, well, angry. Not only angry, but ashamed and embarrassed. Many things. Angered, most of all. I go to the kitchen and I say, "Who the hell does this guy think he is? Doing this to me, talking to me like this. Who is this guy anyway?" Well, I decide I'll show him. I pull my zipper back down to about my navel. I go back out and I get to my sweeping, thinking, I'll show these people. Sure enough, the man calls me over again. "Hey, you boy, come on over here." He was not a nice man, at least not nice to me. I came over and I stood before him with my zipper pulled down to my navel. And I said, "Yeah, what do you want?" Or something stupid like that, I'm sure. And he says to me, "You're fired. Punch out." And I say, "Well, who are you?" And he says, "I'm Sierra Sid, and this is my casino." My mother is, of course, devastated by this. She was in tears when she found out, and I was worried for a few minutes that my mother might get fired. But of course, she did not get fired, and she actually went on to become a 21 dealer for many years at Sierra Sid. My mother, God bless her, she was beloved by Sierra Sid. She said, I asked Sid to give you your job back, but Sid said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't do that," which I respect. And I ended up getting another job somewhere else, maybe the next day. Reno's the kind of town, at least it was then, where you could, without any experience, get some kind of job. And so that's the story of me getting fired from Sierra Sid's. Thanks for listening.
Now back to my conversation with Alex Kroll. So now you're a copywriter, you're a voiceover artist, 2 dream careers. You don't have to get dressed in the morning. You can do all your work in your boxer shorts if you choose. Tell me where the more lucrative path is and where the greater future is for you.
Well, it's feeling like voiceover. As you say, the writer is quite often an afterthought nowadays. I feel writers aren't as privy to the inmost workings of the branding process. They're, often show up to apply lines to visuals that already exist and ideas that are already in motion. So with voiceover, I mean, it's a great thing. I would say that's where most of my hopes are right now. Help me, Spot. Surak would not cry out so.
I met Nimoy.
You did?
I actually worked with him on a feature film. And I met him, you know, he's a BU grad. I'm a BU grad.
Fascinating.
I'm about 2 years out of college living in Boston, and there's a movie shooting in town called The Good Mother. The Good Mother, the novel, was written by Sue Miller, who was a professor at BU, and one of my professors, an advanced creative writing course. Probably my most unpleasant experience in college was sitting in that very small room with the creaky floors, you know, right out of the movies, you know, tiny little room with a noisy radiator and a really, really exacting professor, up-and-coming writer telling me that my work was shit. So she publishes her novel. It does quite well. 2 years later, there's a film being made, and I get a job on the movie. Diane Keaton is cast as the main character, the good mother, as it were, and her love interest is none other than Liam Neeson. So I got a chance to walk both of these great actors to and from the set on this film, and it was directed by Nimoy, who was absolutely such a wonderful gentleman. And the first day of pre-production, I'm in the office, and Nimoy's there. It's a pretty small office, and he calls me over, and he sees I'm wearing a Boston University sweatshirt, and he said, "Hey, I went to BU." I'm like, "Oh, no kidding." And we start just chatting like people, and I'm like, I am talking
to a god,
to Mr. Spock.
To a god.
Really wonderful experience for me. And I did, the first day of production, get a chance to see that teacher again. I introduced myself to her. She was among all the extras that day, just sort of hanging out on set. I'm like, "Do you remember me?" And this has only been 3 years. She's like, "You're the one who wrote all those little Gremlins stories, aren't you?" Okay. You're the last to go through the line. Crew first, then the neighborhood kids, then the extras.
Showing the writer the respect.
There goes that train. Red, blue light behind.
How can we find your writings? Give me that one more time. And how can we book you for VO assignments?
Well, the short stories and essays are on www.selfinflictedworld.com and or www.alexkrolljr.com, ALEXKROLLJR.com. And I'm well represented by Mr. Stephen Arcieri at Arcieri Talent at 212-286-1700. Once again, that's 212-286-1700.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Alex Kroll, the one and only, and he's yours for a song. Hey, this edition of Promo Cowboys has been brought to you by bourbon, beer, and bar pretzels, and by the novel Promo Cowboy, a TV industry thriller by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons, available in hard copy at Amazon.com and your finer bookstores, and find the ebook at the Amazon Kindle store. I want to thank my guest today, Alex Kroll, for his time and his thoughts. I also want to thank freesound.org, who provided instrumental music for this Promo Cowboys podcast, and the Pond 5 Public Domain Project for all the archival cowboy ditties I threw in there for fun. Thanks for joining me. This is Barry Fitzsimmons, aka Promo Cowboy. I'm really excited about this podcast, and I'm interested in your feedback. Reach out to me on Twitter at Promo Cowboy, also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Barry Fitzsimmons. If you've got a good story about getting fired, I hope I'll hear from you. We're of course happy to keep your name out of it. Thanks also to my son Patrick Fitzsimmons for creating the Promo Cowboys podcast artwork. By the way, that image is an homage to a Hollywood classic from the 1950s. The first 5 listeners to private message me the correct title of that film gets a free copy of Promo Cowboy. I'll even sign it if you want. I want to shout out to my support team, Jared Minero, Charles Berlepsch, Zach Trinka. Thanks for your help, guys. Promo Cowboys is a Steve production. Steve is a division of Igloo Media, LLC. This podcast was produced by yours truly, Barry Fitzsimmons. Thanks again for joining me. And as Promo Cowboy says, shoot, could have been a lot worse. Take us out.